Everyone talks about the United States and Russia as the big superpower story. But far up in the frozen north, there's another front line that almost no one pays attention to. A quiet, icy chessboard where two very different countries face each other across the Arctic: Norway and Russia. In most people's minds, Russia is the obvious giant. Massive land, nuclear submarines, huge Arctic coastline. It feels natural to assume that Russia completely dominates the top of the world. But when you look closely at the map, at the alliances, at the energy pipelines and the listening posts hidden along the coast, the picture becomes a lot more complicated. So in this video, let's ask a different question. In the real world, not just on paper, who actually holds more power in the Arctic? Is it Russia with its overwhelming military presence? Or is it Norway, a much smaller country that somehow sits at the center of NATO's attention in the high north? To understand that, we have to start with something simple. Why does the Arctic even matter? When you look at a globe, the Arctic can seem empty. White, frozen, distant, almost like a blank spot at the top of the map. But that blank spot is becoming one of the most important regions on Earth. As the ice slowly melts, new shipping routes are opening for part of the year. Instead of sailing all the way through the Suez Canal and around Europe, ships can cut straight across the top of the world. That means faster trips, less fuel, and a lot of money saved. Under the seabed, there are huge reserves of oil and gas. Countries see energy when they look at this ice. Russia sees it, Norway sees it, the European Union sees it, the United States sees it. The Arctic is not just about snow and polar bears. It's about money, energy security, and military strategy. And then there's the nuclear angle. Submarines carrying nuclear missiles love the Arctic. The cold, deep, and remote waters make it a perfect hiding place. From those waters, missiles could reach North America or Europe. That's why the Arctic is not just a frozen desert. It's a launch pad and a shield at the same time. Geographically, Norway and Russia sit right next to each other in this region. On one side, you have Norway stretching up along the North Atlantic with its northern counties and the islands of Svalbard deep in the Arctic. On the other side, you have Russia's Kola Peninsula, with ports like Murmansk and the headquarters of the Northern Fleet. If you zoom in on that area, you don't see an empty wilderness. You see a crowded, strategic neighborhood. So let's start by looking at what Russia brings to this Arctic table. Russia is, without question, the Arctic heavyweight in terms of raw numbers. It has the longest Arctic coastline of any country. Along that coast are ports, military bases, and airfields. In the northwest, near Norway, sits Russia's Northern Fleet, one of its most important naval forces. The Northern Fleet is home to many of Russia's nuclear-armed submarines and major warships. These submarines are part of Russia's nuclear deterrent, the weapons meant to guarantee that even if Russia were attacked, it could strike back. From hidden positions under the Arctic ice, they are designed to disappear and survive. Over the past years, Russia has also modernized or reopened several Arctic bases. Radar stations, air defense systems, and long-range missiles create a kind of military wall along parts of its northern coast. From Russia's perspective, this is not just about power projection. It's also about protecting its vulnerable northern flank and its nuclear forces. On top of that, Russia sees the Arctic as an economic lifeline. It has invested heavily in Arctic oil and gas projects, pipelines, and shipping. The so-called Northern Sea Route, which passes along its Arctic coast, is central to this vision. Russia wants ships that use that route to follow its rules, pay its fees, and sometimes even use Russian icebreakers as escorts. When you put all of this together, Russia looks absolutely dominant. Bigger military, more bases, more coastline, more icebreakers, more visible power. It's easy to look at that and say, well, game over. Russia clearly controls the Arctic. But that's where Norway quietly enters the picture and changes the story. Norway is small in population compared to Russia, but its geography gives it a very special role. Look at the northern tip of Norway. It sits right next to Russia's Kola Peninsula, where the Northern Fleet is based. The seas between them, the Barents Sea and the Norwegian Sea, are like a narrow gateway between the Russian Arctic and the North Atlantic. Because of that, Norway is often described as NATO's eyes and ears in the north. You don't see massive Norwegian armies lined up along the border. You don't see endless rows of tanks. What you do see, especially if you zoom out and think about alliances, is information, sensors, and cooperation. Norway hosts advanced radars along its coast. It participates in undersea surveillance systems that can detect submarines. It works closely with the United States, the United Kingdom, and other allies on intelligence sharing. In simple terms, Norway helps NATO keep track of what's moving in the high north, especially what's leaving or entering Russian waters. This intelligence and surveillance role is a form of power that doesn't look dramatic on a map. There are no giant arrows or huge fleets. But in a modern conflict, knowing who is where and when can be more important than just having a big army on paper. Then there's Norway's role as a NATO member. Norway was one of the founding members of NATO, and its territory is covered by NATO's collective defense guarantee. That means if Norway were attacked, it would not be standing alone against Russia. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the rest of the alliance would all be involved. You can see this in the regular military exercises that take place in and around Norway. Large drills bring together Norwegian forces, US Marines, British units, and other NATO partners. They practice operating in extreme cold, on icy roads, in deep snow, and in the dark Arctic winter. These exercises are not just for show. They send a clear message that Norway's defense is not just Norway's problem. It's a shared responsibility. Norway also hosts pre-positioned equipment for allies. In simple language, that means that vehicles, weapons, and supplies are stored in Norway so that allied troops can fly in and be ready quickly if there's a crisis. Again, this is quiet power. It doesn't look as impressive as a massive Russian base, but it changes the real-world balance in a crisis. And then we have energy. Russia has huge Arctic energy reserves, but it faces sanctions, political distrust, and a reputation problem. Many European countries are trying to reduce their dependence on Russian energy, especially gas. Norway, on the other hand, is seen as a stable, reliable supplier. It already exports large amounts of gas and oil to Europe. Some of this comes from fields in the far north, developed and regulated under Norwegian law and environmental rules. As Europe has tried to move away from Russian gas, Norway's importance as an energy partner has grown. That gives Norway a different kind of power. It's not about tanks or submarines, it's about trust and long-term relationships. European countries are more comfortable relying on Norway than on Russia, especially in times of tension. That trust is something you can't build quickly, and it has huge value. Now, of course, Norway and Russia don't just stare at each other across a line on the map. They share actual borders and shared seas, and sometimes that leads to friction. The Barents Sea to the northeast of Norway is rich in fish and natural resources. For years, Norway and Russia had disputes over where exactly the maritime border should be drawn. Eventually, they agreed on a boundary which brought more predictability. But even with agreements in place, these waters remain sensitive. Coast guards, fishing vessels, and naval ships from both sides operate there. Any incident, a collision, an inspection gone wrong, a misunderstood maneuver, has the potential to create tension. Then there is Svalbard, an archipelago far to the north. Svalbard is under Norwegian sovereignty, but an international treaty allows citizens of certain other countries, including Russia, to engage in economic activities there. As a result, there is a small Russian community and mining presence in one of the settlements. Svalbard matters symbolically and strategically. It's a physical reminder that Norwegian and Russian interests are deeply intertwined in the Arctic. For Norway, it's a test of its ability to manage a unique territory while respecting its treaty obligations. For Russia, it's a foothold in an area that also has strategic and scientific value. Beyond treaties and boundaries, there is another layer: the invisible world of intelligence, submarines, and surveillance flights. Every now and then, reports emerge of suspected submarine activity, unidentified objects in the water, or aircraft flying close to borders. These are signs of how seriously both sides take the Arctic. This is not a sleepy backwater. It's a zone where everyone is watching everyone else. But there's also a human side to all of this. In small Norwegian towns near the Russian border, people still live normal lives. There are roads that lead toward the border, shops, schools, and fishing boats that head out to sea. In earlier years, there was more cross-border contact, people traveling for shopping or work. Even today, despite tensions, there's a sense that ordinary people on both sides of the line are not the ones calling the shots. They just live with the consequences of big power decisions. On one side of that border, you have a NATO country with a strong social welfare system and high living standards. On the other, a region that is heavily militarized and deeply important to Russia's strategic posture. The contrast is sharp, but the geography forces them to be neighbors whether they like it or not. So after all of this, who actually holds power in the Arctic? If we look only at military size, the answer is obvious: Russia. Russia has more troops in the region, more bases, more aircraft, more submarines, and more nuclear weapons. Its northern fleet alone represents a huge concentration of hard power. On a simple force comparison chart, Russia wins comfortably. But real power is not only about numbers, it's also about alliances, geography, trust, and economic relationships. Militarily, Norway is smaller, but it doesn't stand alone. It is deeply integrated into NATO. Its pilots train with allied pilots. Its soldiers learn alongside allied soldiers. Its radars and sensors feed into a larger network. If a crisis broke out, Norway's own forces would be backed by some of the world's most advanced militaries. Strategically, Norway's location gives it leverage far beyond its size. It sits right next to the main routes that Russian submarines and ships would use to reach the Atlantic. Monitoring those routes, sharing data with allies, and hosting exercises there means Norway is not just a passive neighbor, it's an active gatekeeper. Politically, Norway is seen as a predictable, moderate, and responsible Arctic actor. It cooperates with other Arctic countries on search and rescue, environmental protection, and scientific research. It plays by international rules, and that buys it goodwill and influence in international forums. Economically, Norway's role as a stable energy supplier gives it importance in European energy security that Russia has, in many ways, weakened for itself. Russia's power in energy has been enormous, but it's also been eroded by sanctions, political distrust, and efforts to diversify away from Russian supplies. Norway has moved in the opposite direction, smaller, but more trusted. So maybe the better way to answer the question is this: Russia dominates the Arctic in terms of sheer military muscle and physical presence. It has the bigger hammer. But Norway, through its alliances, intelligence role, and economic reliability, quietly controls a lot of the levers that actually matter in day-to-day Arctic security for the West. The Arctic of the future will only become more important. As ice retreats and more of the ocean becomes accessible, new shipping lanes will open longer each year. Fishing grounds will shift. More oil and gas fields may be explored or at least fought over politically. Other players like China, the European Union, and non-Arctic countries will also want a say. That means the pressure on both Norway and Russia will increase. Russia will want to protect and expand its influence along the Northern Sea route and in its Arctic regions. Norway will be pushed to balance deterrence and dialogue, to stay firm as a NATO front line while avoiding unnecessary escalation with its giant neighbor. In the end, the Arctic might not be controlled by any single country in a simple way. Instead, it may become a web of overlapping influence. Russian military might, Norwegian and allied surveillance, international shipping interests, energy companies, and global climate concerns all pulling in different directions. So, who actually holds power in the Arctic? On paper, you'd say Russia. In the real world, where alliances, information, and trust matter just as much as tanks, Norway's influence is far bigger than its size suggests. The more you look, the more it feels like this. Russia may own more of the ice, but Norway has a bigger voice in how the world responds to what happens there. And maybe the real question isn't just who holds power in the Arctic today, but who will hold it tomorrow, when the ice is thinner, the sea lanes are busier, and the world's attention finally turns north in a serious way. If you've watched this far, I'd love to hear what you think. Who do you believe has more real power in the Arctic? Russia, with its massive military and nuclear fleet, or Norway with its strategic position and NATO backing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like it so more people see it. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into Norway, geopolitics, and life in the high north. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Stay curious about the places most people never think about, especially the ones hidden in the frozen north.